Have you ever paused for a moment and asked yourself whether what people call love is really just a fear of being alone? What if the desire to always have someone beside you is nothing more than a way to avoid confronting the emptiness inside? And what if a relationship is sometimes just another escape from facing who you truly are? Nothing reveals the truth more clearly than the discomfort we feel when we are alone. The Stoic philosophers urged people to imagine themselves lying on their deathbed, the room quiet, the air heavy, the weight of their entire life pressing down on them, and to ask a single question. Did you live your own life, or did you spend it standing in someone else's shadow? They warned us about giving up our inner freedom. The chains we choose for ourselves are the hardest ones to break. We disguise them as romance, companionship, and the illusion of feeling complete. Yet deep inside, something still burns. Something pulls at you, reminding you that you were meant for more. If you've ever felt that quiet voice inside you, if you've sensed that something deeper is hiding beneath the surface of your relationships, then you already know this message is meant for you. And if you're searching for the courage to face yourself without hiding behind masks, to build a life grounded in your own strength, then this is the path forward. Most people don't fall in love because they feel whole. They fall in love because they're afraid of the silence that waits when everything else fades away. Kind of silence that forces you to hear your own thoughts. The kind that brings back the questions you've been avoiding for years. There's an empty space in their lives, wide, echoing, and painful, so they fill it with another person. Not always because they truly want that person, but because it's easier than facing themselves. We rarely admit how much of what we call love is really just avoidance dressed up beautifully. It's easier to lose yourself in someone else's story than to confront your own. Carl Jung once wrote, "Loneliness does not come from having no people around you, but from being unable to communicate the things that matter most to you." For many, a relationship becomes a shield against that loneliness, a way to feel understood without ever truly understanding themselves. But when love is built on fear, it becomes fragile. Every argument feels like a threat. Every moment of distance feels like a crack forming. Relationship is forced to carry not only two lives, but also all the unresolved wounds inside both people. And when those cracks begin to show, panic takes over. People cling tighter. They negotiate away their values. They silence their desires. They reshape themselves just to keep the other person from leaving. At that point, it's no longer love, survival. It's a way to avoid being left alone with the very silence they've been running from. Instead of growing through love, people begin chasing validation, approval, and acceptance. And in the process, they trade away the honesty that could have helped them evolve. This is how so many lose themselves without even realizing it. It starts quietly. Small compromises. Where to eat, what to watch, how to spend the weekend. It feels harmless. Feels like partnership. But then the compromises grow. You hide parts of yourself because you know they won't understand. You abandon certain dreams because they create tension. You reshape your personality not because you want to, but because you're afraid being fully yourself might cost you the relationship. Over time, you barely recognize who you used to be. Marcus Aurelius once said, "It is not death that a man should fear, but never truly beginning to live." And that is the quiet tragedy. So many people stop truly living the moment they become afraid of losing someone. When fear becomes the foundation of love, it blocks the very thing love is supposed to give you, freedom. Real love should help you stand taller, not shrink smaller. It should strengthen your individuality, not erase it. But when fear takes control, love turns into a silent contract filled with unspoken rules. Don't be too much. Don't change too fast. Don't disrupt the balance, even if that balance is slowly suffocating you. People convince themselves this is normal, that this is simply the price of being with someone. But the real cost is far greater than they realize. They pay with their authenticity, their creativity, their growth, all of it traded for the comfort of not having to face themselves. And the irony is this: silence they're running from is not their enemy. It's their teacher. In solitude, the noise fades. And for the first time, you begin to hear your real voice again. At first, it's uncomfortable. You hear your doubts, your fears, your unfinished dreams. But in that silence, you also find your truth, fears, regrets. But if you stay in that silence long enough, you also begin to hear your values, your purpose, your truth. Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." And that journey is impossible if you're constantly submerged in someone else's presence. If every thought you have is shaped around keeping the peace instead of finding your own center. The fear behind love is rarely about losing another person, or often it's about losing the distraction they provide. When that distraction disappears, you're left alone with yourself. And for many, that is the most frightening encounter of all. Yet it's also the encounter that changes everything. Because once you can sit in your own silence without needing to escape it, you stop depending on others to make you feel complete. You stop trading pieces of your identity for a sense of belonging. You begin to love by choice, not by necessity. And that kind of love can't be broken by distance or absence, because it isn't built on fear. It's built on freedom. Facing the silence isn't easy. It takes courage to stop reaching for someone just to avoid yourself. But that courage becomes the foundation of a life where love is a gift, not a crutch. Where being with someone is a conscious decision, not an unconscious escape. Where you can walk away from what no longer serves you. Not because you don't care, because you care too much to abandon yourself. Fear will keep you running in circles. Facing it will set you free. And freedom, as the Stoics taught, is the only possession no one can ever take from you. From the moment we're old enough to understand words, a story begins to shape us. It arrives through bedtime, tales, movies, and the way adults talk about life. You grow up, you meet someone, you fall in love, you settle down. It's painted as the ultimate destination, the final chapter, where everything makes sense and the credits roll over, a happy ending. But few ever stop to ask what happens after. The screen fades to black, and even fewer question whether this script truly serves everyone, or whether it quietly steals our chance to meet the most important person we'll ever know. Ourselves. This conditioning doesn't arrive like an order. It's subtle, quiet, almost invisible. It lives in casual questions from relatives. When are you going to meet someone? As if your life is just a waiting room for love. It hides inside compliments that tie your worth to your relationship. Status. By the time we're adults, the message has settled deep inside us unquestioned. Like gravity, the impact is powerful. Without realizing it, many people grow into adults who believe life without a partner is incomplete by default. They may travel, learn, and build careers. But somewhere in the background, a voice whispers that all of it is just filler until they find someone. So they enter relationships not from readiness or self-awareness, but from loyalty to a story they never chose. Jung once wrote, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." For many, a relationship becomes a way to avoid that terrifying work. If someone else validates us, we don't have to fully validate ourselves. If someone else reflects our worth, we don't have to face the silence that asks us to define it. On our own, this invisible programming shapes not only who we choose, but how we behave once we choose. If you've been taught that your value depends on being partnered, you may endure situations that slowly damage you just to avoid returning. To the dreaded state of being single, you ignore red flags, you tolerate disrespect. You twist yourself into someone else's ideal, all to avoid the shame of being alone. Marcus Aurelius once observed, "It is not things themselves that disturb us, but our judgments about them." And here, the judgment is quiet but crushing. Alone means failure. Together means success. This false equation traps countless. Why people in lives that don't reflect who they truly are? The script leaves no room for individuality. It's one size fits all, sold as universal truth. Some people thrive in deep partnership. Others need long stretches of solitude to grow. But the conditioning rarely makes space for the second path. Solitude is rebranded as loneliness. And loneliness is framed as a problem that must be fixed quickly. Eventually, the pressure moves inside you, even when no one is watching. You may feel uneasy in your own company, as if you're falling behind, wasting time, missing your cue. Over time, that restlessness becomes the background noise of your life. You measure your progress not by how deeply you know yourself, but by how close you are to fulfilling the cultural blueprint. The danger of living by this script is that it discourages true self-exploration. If the destination is already chosen, why wander? Why question whether the path still fits who you've become? The story tells you that discovering yourself is secondary to finding someone else, and in doing so, it quietly asks you to abandon parts of yourself that don't fit neatly into a T. Relationship narrative: you suppress ambitions, you hide unconventional ideas, you shrink your dreams, and slowly, the story doesn't just shape your relationships, it reshapes your identity. Jung described individuation as the central task of life, the process of becoming who you truly are. That journey requires time, space, and the courage to stand apart. But the invisible script pushes you in the opposite direction to merge, pair off, and bind your life to another as quickly as possible. And here lies the tension. Individuation asks you to turn inward. The script demands that you look outward. Without realizing it, you may spend decades caught between these two forces, pulled away from your own becoming by the gravity of expectation. Love itself is not the problem. Companionship is not wrong. The danger begins when love becomes compulsory, when it's pursued not from desire, but from fear, without ever asking whether you're truly ready or whether the person you're becoming even fits the role you were taught to perform. Relationships, formed under the weight of conditioning, often become reflections of that conditioning: safe, familiar, predictable, but rarely transformative. You may feel comfort, but you won't uncover the full truth of who you are. And the tragedy is that by the time you recognize what's happening, years may have passed, and the person you could have become feels distant, almost unreachable. The first step toward breaking this grip is awareness, seeing the story for what it really is. A story. It's not an unbreakable law, it changes everything. The moment you realize you're free to write your own script, urgency to find someone begins. To loosen, you start to see being single not as a lack, but as a rare opportunity. An open landscape where you can plant ideas, dreams, and versions of yourself that would never survive in the cramped soil of living only for someone else's approval. The Stoics called this living in harmony with nature, aligning your life with who you truly are, not with artificial narratives passed down to you. Breaking free from this invisible conditioning doesn't mean rejecting love. It means refusing to let the fear of being alone dictate your path. It means choosing to know yourself deeply before choosing to share yourself. Because when you finally meet someone from a place of wholeness, you won't be searching for them to fill a void. You'll be inviting them to walk beside you on a road you've already made your own. And that kind of connection can't be manufactured by culture or expectation. It's born from freedom, not fear. This transformation doesn't arrive in a single, dramatic moment. It's not as if you wake up one day and everything is different. It happens slowly, so slowly that you can convince yourself nothing is changing at all. It begins with a small compromise. You skip something you wanted to do because it doesn't fit the plan. You soften your opinion to avoid tension. You tell yourself it's not worth the argument, that this is what maturity looks like, that love means meeting halfway. At first it feels harmless, even noble. But over time, those small concessions stack up. And the person you once were begins to fade, not because anyone demanded it, but because you gave it away piece by piece without noticing the cost. The shift is almost invisible. You adapt to keep things smooth, to preserve the bond you believe you can't live without. And while compromise is part of any relationship, there's a difference between adapting and erasing. When you start censoring your thoughts before you speak them, when you swallow desires because they might create discomfort, you begin trading authenticity for security. The Stoics warned against this kind of bargain. Seneca wrote, "He who is brave is free." And real freedom means being able to exist without constantly editing yourself. But when love turns into a performance, a stage where you're always rehearsing the right lines, freedom quietly slips out the back door. One reason this loss is so hard to notice is because it often gets labeled as growth. You tell yourself you're becoming more understanding, more flexible, less selfish. And sometimes that's true, but there's a thin line between growing and shrinking. And when that line blurs, you may not realize which side you're on until it's far behind you. You start noticing small changes. You laugh less the way you used to. You chase fewer of the interests that once made you feel alive, ain't you? Hesitate before speaking your truth. On their own, none of these seem alarming, but together, they form a quiet erosion of self, a version of you slowly reshaped to fit someone else's comfort. What makes this erosion so dangerous is that it's self-inflicted. Rarely does anyone ask you to disappear. Instead, you fade, in the hope of preserving the connection. You believe love survives by sanding down your edges, by becoming easier, by being agreeable even when it costs you something essential, over months or years. The person in the mirror looks familiar, yet strangely distant. You recognize the outline, but the inner fire, the unique mix of thoughts, desires, and expressions that made you, has dimmed. And this slow disappearance doesn't only happen in romance. It happens in friendships, in families, in workplaces, anywhere. The pressure to belong outweighs the courage to stand as yourself. Erosion begins. Because the change is gradual, it starts to feel normal. You tell yourself everyone compromises, that maybe this is just the price of connection. But deep down, quiet restlessness stirs. It's the part of you that remembers a time when you felt fully alive in your own skin, unedited and unapologetic. Painful truth is this: disappearing does not strengthen a bond. It weakens it. Relationships built on filtered selves and partial truths rest on fragile ground. You may keep the peace on the surface, but underneath, resentment grows. The connection becomes less about closeness and more about maintaining an image. Marcus Aurelius reminded us, the soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts. And when your thoughts are shaped by fear and self-erasure, your life slowly takes on that same shade. When your thoughts are constantly reshaped to avoid conflict, your soul slowly takes on the muted shades of avoidance, losing the vibrant colors that once made you unmistakably you. Reclaiming yourself from this slow disappearance doesn't mean swinging to the opposite extreme and refusing all compromise. It means remembering that the truest form of love, romantic, platonic, or even self-love, only thrives when both people stand whole. It means understanding that you can be kind without erasing your boundaries, that you can be loving without silencing your truth. The courage to be fully yourself will sometimes create tension, but tension is not the enemy. As the Stoics understood, challenges are the training ground for strength. A relationship that cannot withstand your authenticity is not one that can truly support you. The slow disappearance feels safe, and that's what makes it so seductive. But that safety is an illusion if it costs you your life force. You were never meant to become a softened, easily digestible version of yourself just to preserve an idea of love. Love that requires your absence is not love. It's a contract for slow self-abandonment. And when you finally see that, you begin to understand something essential. The greatest gift you can bring to any relationship is the fullness of who you are, unshaped by fear and untouched by unnecessary compromise. Because the moment you stop disappearing, you stop trading your life for someone else's comfort, and you start living it the way it was meant to be lived, whole, present, and unmistakably yours. Belonging is one of the deepest human desires. We are wired to seek it, to feel rooted in a place, a group, or a person. There is comfort in knowing you have somewhere to return to.
Yes.
Someone who claims you, a life that feels shared instead of solitary. But what we rarely acknowledge is the quiet cost belonging can demand when it isn't grounded in freedom. That cost is rarely demanded openly. Instead, it shows up as a constant, almost invisible negotiation of your thoughts, your desires, your very identity. Over time, you learn which parts of yourself are welcomed and which should stay hidden. And the more you trade those parts away, the safer you feel. Even as something essential inside you begins to fade, the safety of belonging often comes wrapped in rules. Some spoken, most unspoken. You learn which opinions are better left unsaid, which ambitions should be softened. Emotions must be filtered so others remain comfortable. Slowly, you begin living in a narrow emotional middle ground. Never too much, never too little. Always adjusted to fit the space you occupy, Epictetus warned. If you wish to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid. But belonging often makes us unwilling to be misunderstood, so we choose smoothness over honesty, acceptance over self-expression. And that choice, repeated often enough, reshapes who we are. What makes this cost so difficult to recognize is that it often feels like love. You tell yourself you're compromising because you care, because you're being a good partner, a good friend, a good family member. Sometimes that's true, but the line between healthy compromise and self-erasure is thin. Belonging has a way of pushing you across it without you noticing. One day you realize you only speak when it feels safe. You've stopped chasing certain dreams because they don't fit the shared plan. You've become careful, measured, less spontaneous. Not because you wanted to change, but because change threatened the approval you worked so hard to earn. The cost of belonging is rarely paid in dramatic moments. More often, it's paid in small, nearly invisible installments. The joke you didn't tell, the truth you didn't speak, the risk you didn't take. Each seems harmless on its own, but together, they form a pattern. Over time, you stop living for clarity and start living for stability. You trade pieces of your individuality for security, believing the more you give, the more you'll belong. But when your thoughts are constantly adjusted to fit expectations, your soul slowly loses its distinct color. Choosing solitude, even temporarily, means keeping ownership of your mind, your desires, and your essence without constant negotiation. It's not about isolation. It's about sovereignty. It's about knowing your choices come from your center, not from a calculation of how they'll be received. Connection itself is not dangerous. Love, friendship, and community can be powerful sources of growth, but they only serve you if they allow your full presence. When belonging requires constant self-editing, it isn't connection. It's control. And control, no matter how gentle, limits your ability to live as yourself. Jung believed individuation, becoming whole, cannot happen when your identity depends on approval. You cannot integrate the parts of yourself you hide to maintain belonging. Choosing yourself over the comfort of fitting in is not easy. It can mean standing apart, breaking unspoken rules, letting go of relationships that cannot hold your truth. It can mean loneliness that cuts deeper than expected, but it also means living without the weight of constant adjustment, without the slow erosion of your voice and vision. And in that freedom, something extraordinary happens. You begin to belong to yourself. The cost of belonging is real, but so is the reward of holding your life in your own hands. Staying single doesn't mean rejecting love, it means refusing to trade your essence for it. It means that when you do choose to belong, it will be on your terms as your full self, without shrinking to fit, because belonging is sweetest when it doesn't cost you who you are. And freedom, once claimed, makes every connection deeper, richer, and more real. When the constant noise of other people's voices fades, something unexpected rises in its place. At first, it's unsettling, kind of quiet that feels almost too loud. You notice thoughts you didn't realize were there. Ideas buried under conversations, obligations, and the steady pull of someone else's presence. Alone, there is nothing to distract you from them. They rise with an intensity that can feel overwhelming, like opening a room you've avoided for years and switching on a harsh, revealing light. Jung once wrote, "Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakens." Solitude forces that awakening. It turns you inward. It asks you to face what you've been avoiding. And while it may feel uncomfortable at first, something else is hidden inside it. Clarity. As the days pass, that clarity deepens. You begin to hear your own voice more precisely. Without constantly reshaping your thoughts to fit someone else's expectations, your ideas stretch further. They grow bolder. You start following your mind down paths you once ignored because they didn't match the shared plan or the comfort of the group. Your inner world expands. Connections appear where you never saw them before. This is the part of solitude people rarely talk about. The way your mind sharpens when nothing is there to dilute it at first. Being alone can feel like loss, especially if you've been taught to see solitude as absence, but slowly something else emerges. Presence, no partner to share your day with, no one to consult before making a decision, no immediate echo of your words. At first it feels like something is missing, but as you lean into it, you realize absence has been misunderstood all along. What you've actually been given is space. Pure, open, unclaimed space. And space has a way of revealing the truth. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." In solitude, that truth becomes undeniable. You stop outsourcing your validation, your direction, your worth. They begin to come from the inside out. And the power of that shift is difficult to explain until you experience it. The more time you spend in this space, the more it reshapes you. At first, you try to fill the silence with music, screens, endless conversations. But slowly, you let the quiet exist. You discover that not every thought needs to be drowned out. That some of the discomfort you feel in stillness is simply the process of meeting yourself again in that stillness. Your desires sharpen. You begin to recognize which dreams are truly yours, and which were inherited from someone else's vision for your life. You feel drawn back to things you once forgot mattered to you. This is when solitude shifts from uncomfortable to addictive, not because you want to avoid people, but because you've tasted the freedom of living without constant compromise. There is a unique energy that comes from being alone on your own terms. It isn't the isolation born of rejection or loss. It's chosen, intentional, rooted in self-respect. The Stoics would describe this as living in alignment with nature, guided by your own inner compass. You begin to notice how much of your old life revolved around reaction. Reacting to someone else's moods, their needs, their plans. Now your energy moves toward creation. You're no longer managing someone else's emotions before exploring your own. You're not tempering your excitement or holding back ideas because they might be misunderstood. Time begins to feel different, more open, more spacious. You can follow a thought until it's fully formed. Start a project at midnight because inspiration strikes. Pause halfway through something to chase a new idea without needing to explain yourself. And in those moments, you realize how much energy you once spent just maintaining the balance of shared life. Now that energy belongs to you, of course. Solitude isn't always filled with inspiration. There are days when the quiet feels heavy, when you long for the ease of someone else's presence, but even then, you begin to understand that the weight has meaning. It's shaping you, strengthening your ability to stand on your own, teaching you how to sit with your own mind without running from it. Eventually, the space solitude creates stops feeling like a void and starts feeling like home. You realize that your strongest connections with others, with your work, with the world, grow deeper when they rise from this foundation. You no longer fear being alone because you've seen what can be built there. And once you've felt the sharpness of thought, the clarity of vision, and the unfiltered pull of your own desires, you protect that space fiercely, not as a wall against the world, but as the ground beneath your feet. Because when you truly belong to yourself, no connection can take that away, and no absence can strip it from you. From our earliest stories, we're taught a familiar promise that somewhere out there exists another person who will complete us. It appears in fairy tales, in songs, in movies. You are not whole until you find your other half. At first, the idea feels romantic, comforting. It suggests that life's deepest fulfillment comes from merging with another. But beneath that softness hides a dangerous belief that on your own, you are incomplete. And when you accept that belief, you begin living as if your worth and stability depend on someone else. This myth quietly shapes your choices. If you believe you are incomplete, every decision begins to orbit around attracting or keeping another person. Your ambitions shrink so they don't threaten the relationship. Parts of your personality are softened to fit the image of a perfect partner. Over time, your identity becomes less about what feels true to you and more about what secures connection. This isn't love. It's dependence disguised as devotion. And dependence, no matter how beautifully wrapped, slowly erodes individuality. It offers a false sense of safety. It tells you that as long as the relationship survives, you are secure. But that security has a cost. You begin measuring yourself by someone else's standards. You ignore the quiet signals inside you, the dissatisfaction, curiosity, the unspoken dreams, because following them might disrupt the bond. Epictetus wrote, "If you want to be free, wish for nothing that depends on others." Freedom cannot grow in the soil of dependence. It shrinks there until one day, you realize your life is built on ground that could disappear at any moment. When you buy into the myth of incompleteness, relationships stop being choices and start becoming lifelines. Losing the other person doesn't just feel like heartbreak, it feels like losing a part of yourself. That's why people stay in situations that no longer nourish them, why they silence their instincts, why they ignore their needs. They believe leaving would make them less than whole. But the truth is this: you were never half of anything. You were always an entire person, capable of love, creation, and purpose, without needing to fuse your identity to another. The wholeness you seek from someone else can only be built from within, and it's worth asking, where did this belief come from? In part, its cultural society often treats partnership and family as the highest form of achievement. Single life is framed as a waiting room, a temporary state you're expected to escape. Even our language reflects it. We say settling down, as if only in partnership does life finally take shape. But that story leaves out something essential. This story leaves out an important reality. Partnership is not a guarantee of fulfillment, and being single is not a sentence of emptiness. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that very little is needed to live a happy life. Everything required is already within you. The myth of incompleteness hides this truth. It keeps people searching outward when the real work has always been inward. Breaking free from that myth doesn't mean rejecting relationships. It means approaching them from a place of self-sufficiency instead of need. When you no longer see yourself as a fragment waiting to be completed, love becomes a choice, not a dependency. You can give without fear of losing yourself. You can receive without turning it into your identity. This kind of love is deeper and more stable because it exists between two whole people who could stand alone. They had to. Carl Jung understood this well. He believed that real connection only happens when both people have faced their own inner world instead of using each other to escape it. The challenge is that choosing wholeness can feel lonely at first without the immediate validation of a relationship. You are forced to face yourself fully, your flaws, your strengths, your unrealized potential. That is the work most people avoid, which is why dependence can feel so tempting. But once you begin building a life that feels complete on its own terms, something shifts. The fear of being alone begins to fade. Your self-worth stops swinging with the moods and opinions of others. The relationships you do build are no longer meant to fill a void, exist to share abundance. The myth of incompleteness is powerful because it's been repeated so often it feels like truth. But the real truth is far simpler and far more freeing. You are not half of anything. You are a whole, complex, capable human being. The more you live from that place, the less you will tolerate connections that require you to shrink. You stop treating love as a cure for your existence and start seeing it as an enhancement of it. And in that shift, dependence loses its grip. Individuality returns to where it belongs. Your life stops being a search for a missing piece and becomes the creation of something complete. On your own terms, society has a way of expressing its expectations without ever saying them directly. You see it in how people celebrate milestones, buying a house, getting married, having children. These are treated as proof that you're doing life the right way. They make you predictable, and predictability comforts the collective. When you're part of a couple, people think they know what comes next. Your life follows a familiar pattern. It's easier to understand, easier to categorize, easier to manage. But step outside that script, live fully and unapologetically single, and suddenly you become harder to define. Your next move isn't obvious. You don't fit neatly into expectations. And that unpredictability unsettles people because it signals freedom, kind that can't be controlled. The crowd thrives on stability. It wants to know what to expect from you. In return, it offers the comfort of acceptance. But that acceptance comes with an unspoken rule. Don't stray too far from the path. When you're coupled, the path is mostly written for you, shared. Plans, mutual compromises, a rhythm that keeps you in step with the majority. There's nothing wrong with that rhythm unless it drowns out your own. The thriving single person doesn't just hear their own rhythm. They live by it. They make decisions. Without needing consensus, they move in ways that can't be predicted. They build a life that doesn't require permission in a world built on conformity. That is a rare kind of power. Unpredictability is powerful because it comes from autonomy. If no one can predict your next step, it means no one else is directing. Your life, you're not following a script, you're writing one. The crowd may call that instability, but for the outlier, it's freedom. You can pivot when inspiration hits. You can take risks without asking for approval. You can chase opportunities that only make sense to you. That ability to act without delay or compromise is a rare currency, and the crowd doesn't ignore the outlier. It often tries to pull them back in. The questions arrive disguised as concern. Don't you want someone to share your life with? Aren't you afraid of ending up alone? Beneath those questions is an assumption that life outside the couple framework is somehow less valuable. But those questions come from people who measure success by how closely life mirrors the majority. They can't see that chosen solitude is not a lack. It's a luxury. It's a wide open space where self-determination can grow without interruption. The outlier knows this, and that knowledge becomes a shield against the pressure to conform. What unsettles people most about the thriving single person isn't their solitude, it's their contentment within it. If you're alone and miserable, the crowd feels justified. It confirms their path as superior. But if you're alone and thriving, you challenge the narrative. You prove that fulfillment is not exclusive to the couple's lane, that forces others to confront the compromises they've made. Jung understood this discomfort. He observed that deep inner conflict, when overcome, leaves behind a calm that is difficult to shake. The thriving single person has faced the conflict of expectation head on, and in overcoming it, they found a steadiness the crowd can't easily replicate. Unpredictability also builds resilience. When your identity isn't tied to another person, you're less shaken by change. The crowd fears disruption because it threatens their carefully constructed stability. But the outlier moves fluidly through uncertainty. They know life can shift in an instant, and they've built themselves to adapt. This adaptability becomes another form of power, one that allows a person to seize opportunity and endure hardship without losing their identity. In the end, the difference between the crowd and the outlier isn't about relationships, it's about agency. The crowd follows paths designed by others, finding comfort in familiarity and safety in numbers. The outlier steps off the trail, knowing the terrain may be uncertain, but also knowing it belongs to them. By accepting that risk, they gain something the crowd often trades away: the right to live entirely on their own terms. The thriving single person understands that unpredictability is not disorder. It's possibility. It's the freedom to be shaped by choice instead of habit. They are not rejecting connection. They are rejecting the idea that connection must cost them their individuality. And in a world that rewards predictability, it's the outlier's refusal to be easily defined becomes both rebellion and declaration. I belong to myself first. That kind of self-ownership can't be handed to you, can't be taken from you. It has to be built, earned, and defended. And once you possess it, you realize it may be the rarest form of power there is. The greatest ideas rarely arrive in noisy rooms. They don't grow in spaces filled with chatter, constant motion, and the weight of other people's expectations. They are born in the quiet hours when the world feels distant and one is pulling at your attention. There is a certain electricity. In those moments, long nights lost in thought, slow mornings with no obligations waiting. In solitude, the mind roams without permission. It wanders into unfamiliar territory. It forms connections it never would under the pressure of an audience. Carl Jung once said that solitude was a source of renewal that made life meaningful. What he understood is that creativity isn't just about inspiration, it's about space. Without space, raw ideas have nowhere to take shape. When you are alone, you can chase a thought without explaining why it matters. You can follow it into obsession without defending your process. You can let it consume you for hours, days, even weeks, and no one is there to pull you back or slow you down. That freedom to disappear into your own work is rare in a world obsessed with constant connection. It's in that freedom that your creative edge sharpens without compromise, without pressure to adjust your pace for anyone else, without the subtle pull to be agreeable. Crowded spaces, whether physical or emotional, push your attention outward. You become aware of how you're being seen, aware of what's expected, aware of how your actions might be judged. That awareness can help with collaboration. But for certain kinds of thinking, it's poison. Some ideas need to be wild, unmeasured, untouched by outside influence. Solitude removes the need for approval. You stop creating to be perceived a certain way. You create because something inside you demands to exist. Seneca wrote that we must sometimes withdraw from the world not to escape it, but to protect the fragile beginnings of ideas until they are strong enough to survive exposure. The absence of expectation is what makes solitude such fertile ground. When no one is waiting for you to produce something specific, you're free to explore the strange, the impractical, even the absurd. And that's often where originality lives. You can write something that may never be published, sketch something no one will ever see, experiment without the fear of failing in public. In this way, solitude becomes a laboratory for imagination, where mistakes are not only allowed, they're necessary. Without the constant lens of someone else's opinion, you take risks that would otherwise feel too vulnerable. There is also a rhythm to solitude that nurtures deep work without interruptions. From shared life, you enter what psychologists call flow, a state where time disappears and only the work remains. You don't have to stop mid-thought to respond to a message. You don't have to explain why you're still at your desk. Momentum builds, focus deepens. The work pulls you forward. And sometimes what emerges from that state is something you could never have forced through effort alone. Marcus Aurelius wrote that nowhere. It's more peaceful or more free from distraction than your own mind. And in that uninterrupted space, your best work often finds you. The creative edge of being alone isn't just about producing more. It's about producing work that feels true. In the absence of others, you stop mimicking. You stop shaping your ideas around what's popular or praised. You stop editing before you've even begun. What comes out is raw, unfiltered, and unmistakably yours, even when imperfect. It carries your signature in a way that work shaped by constant influence never can. That authenticity is worth more than polish, because it becomes the foundation of a voice that cannot be replicated. This is why so many thinkers, writers, and artists throughout history sought solitude, not as rejection of people, but as a necessary ingredient in creation. They understood that while collaboration has its place, the deepest insights are often born in the quiet hours no one else sees. Alone, you wrestle with your contradictions. You push against your limits. You listen for truths too quiet to be heard in the crowd. Those truths may unsettle you at first, but they are the ones that reshape everything you create afterward. In the end, the creative power of solitude comes down to this. It gives you space to hear yourself clearly, without interruption, without distortion. without dilution. It gives you the chance to build something before the world has the opportunity to tell you what it should become. And once you've experienced that kind of freedom, once you've felt what it's like to create without compromise, you begin to protect it fiercely. Not because you want to shut the world out, but because you've seen how alive your work, your ideas, and your very identity become when they're allowed to be born in silence. When you step away from the constant emotional exchange that comes with being closely tied to another person, something subtle but powerful begins to shift. At first, it feels disorienting. You're used to checking another person's emotional temperature before even noticing your own. You've trained yourself to adjust your tone, your energy, and your words to keep balance and avoid friction. But when that constant negotiation ends, the static clears. You begin to realize how much of what you've been carrying was never yours to begin with. It's not that people mean to burden you. It's simply what happens when lives become deeply intertwined. Their joy becomes your joy. Their stress seeps into your body. Over time, the line between where you end and where they begin starts to blur. In solitude, that line becomes visible again. You notice that the irritation you've been feeling isn't your personality. It's the residue of managing someone. The heaviness that lived in your chest wasn't your weight to carry. It was absorbed in the process of trying to keep the peace. The Stoics believed peace of mind comes not from circumstances, but from how we interpret them. When you're alone, those interpretations finally belong to you. They are no longer filtered through someone else's emotional lens at first. That clarity can feel sharp. You're not used to sitting with emotions without immediately explaining them to someone else. There's no one to reassure you that you're overthinking. No one to distract you with their crisis. You are left alone with your feelings fully and honestly. And in that unfiltered experience, you start to hear yourself again. You notice what genuinely excites you, not what you pretended to enjoy to match someone else's mood. You notice what truly irritates you, not just what was convenient to argue about. Slowly, your emotional world stops being shared territory and becomes your own landscape. This is where the detox begins. Without the constant stream of another person's needs, moods, and unspoken expectations, your nervous system starts to settle. You stop waking up, braced for emotional surprises. You stop rehearsing conversations in your head before they happen. You move through your day without the invisible weight of negotiation. Should I say this? Will this upset them? Do I need to fix this before it becomes a problem? Space left behind isn't empty. It's breathed. It's filled with your rhythm, your pace, your balance. Emotional independence doesn't mean you stop caring about others. It means you stop carrying them in ways that cost you yourself. In solitude, you learn to process your emotions internally before handing them to someone else. You learn to validate your own experience without waiting for permission. You give yourself the right to feel without editing for someone else's comfort. And when you do return to connection, you arrive grounded, not entangled. One of the most surprising shifts happens in how joy feels. When your emotions are tied to someone else's, your happiness is never fully yours. It rises and falls with their mood. Alone, joy becomes self-generated, becomes steady. It becomes resilient. You begin to notice the small, pure pleasures that once faded into the background. Morning light in your kitchen, laughing at something only you find funny, the calm of being in your own space. This emotional detox isn't always easy. There will be moments when the absence of someone else's emotional presence feels like a void. You may feel the pull to return to old entanglements simply because they're familiar. But if you resist the urge to fill the silence too quickly, you'll discover that what felt like emptiness was actually space. Space waiting to be reclaimed. Space where your voice, long overshadowed, can finally rise again. In the end, this emotional clearing isn't about removing people from your life. It's about removing the fog they unintentionally place around your inner world. It's about standing at the center of your emotional weather without being swept into someone else's storm. And once you've felt that clarity, once you've tasted the quiet strength of owning every emotion that passes through you. You understand why protecting it becomes non-negotiable, because in that clarity, you don't just hear yourself again, you recognize yourself. And that recognition is where everything begins, when you choose to live on your own terms without leaning on a partner's structure or a group's approval. The labels come quickly. Lonely, selfish, incomplete. But these words aren't really about you. They're about the discomfort your independence creates in others. You've stepped outside the script. People don't know how to place you. The system prefers dependence because it's predictable. A dependent person is easier to guide, easier to influence, easier to keep in place. If your identity comes from a relationship or a role, you'll protect it at all costs, even when it costs you your truth. Dependence keeps people compliant. Independence makes them unpredictable. And unpredictability makes systems nervous. So independence gets mislabeled. They call it loneliness because they can't imagine fulfillment without constant company. They call it selfishness because you chose your path over conformity. They call it incompleteness because their definition of wholeness requires another person. This mislabeling becomes social pressure. If independence looks undesirable, fewer people will pursue it. Staying single looks like failure, people will rush into relationships, even if it means shrinking themselves to fit. The system doesn't need chains, it only needs beliefs. That's why choosing real freedom is radical, not just for you, but for the culture that benefits from your dependence. Independence is threatening because it proves you don't need constant validation. You don't need permission to be yourself. You don't need someone else to complete you. This isn't about rejecting love. It's about removing need from love. And love given freely, without dependence, is the strongest form of it. But to reach that point, you must first stand firmly on your own. And yet this kind of freedom is not easy to hold. It carries its own weight, its own challenges. There will be days when the responsibility of being fully accountable for your life feels heavier than you imagined. No one else takes the blame when you stumble, and no one else claims credit when you succeed. You own it all. And that's precisely the point. Freedom without ownership is not real freedom. It's just dependence masquerading as choice. The truth is, people fear the very thing they secretly desire. Those who criticize your independence often long for the courage to claim their own. They may not even admit it to themselves, but your example forces them to face the compromises they've silently accepted. It's easier to dismiss you than to question whether they have settled for something smaller than what they truly wanted. That's why standing fully in your freedom isn't just a personal act. It has the power to ripple outward. Resist it first. So when they call you lonely, remember that solitude can be a wellspring of strength. When they call you selfish, remember that self-respect is the foundation of every meaningful connection you will ever have. When they call you incomplete, remember that true wholeness doesn't come from adding others to your life. It comes from refusing to surrender the parts of yourself that matter most. The world thrives on dependence, but your life doesn't have to. The labels, the misjudgments, the whispers of disapproval, they lose their power once you recognize them for what they are. Signs that you've stepped beyond the comfort zone where others feel safest. And once you step out, you discover there is far more room to move than you were ever taught to believe. Sovereignty is never stumbled upon. It is earned. The cost is never small. To claim it, you must let go of many comforts people cling to as proof of a good life. The predictable plans, the automatic affection, the companionship that softens holidays and weekends. Its comforts are warm, but they come with invisible strings that quietly pull you away from yourself. To step into true sovereignty is to cut some of those strings. And most won't, because it requires surrendering comforts that feel too good to release in solitude. There is no one to validate your choices, no one to veto your decisions. Every step is yours alone. That freedom is both intoxicating and frightening. There's no one to share the burden when a choice goes wrong, no one to split the blame. But there is also no one to hold you back when your instincts are sharp, when your vision is clear. Sovereignty is learning to carry both victories and mistakes with even steady acceptance. You stop outsourcing responsibility for your life and begin to shoulder it fully. The Stoics understood this well. Epictetus said, "No man is free who is not master of himself." Solitude becomes the proving ground for that mastery. Of course, the price of sovereignty isn't only in the comforts you give up. It comes in moments of doubt, nights when silence feels heavier than expected, mornings when you wish someone were beside you to share small joys. Sovereignty can feel lonely, not because people are absent, but because you've chosen to live without relying on them to steady you. You learn to be your own anchor, to provide your own reassurance, to sit with discomfort rather than seeking a quick fix in the presence of someone else. And that skill, learning to hold your ground without support, becomes one of your greatest strengths. The beauty of sovereignty is how it transforms every connection you do choose to have. Relationships are no longer about filling gaps, become invitations offered from abundance rather than need. You no longer ask anyone to complete you or rescue you from yourself. You invite them to walk alongside you because you want to, not because you must. Jung spoke of individuation, the process of becoming whole within yourself. Sovereignty is the lived expression of that wholeness. You can love deeply without fearing that losing someone will make you lose yourself. But the world rarely encourages this kind of self-rule. Society thrives on mutual reliance, on the predictability of people bound to one another in ways that keep them in place. Sovereign individual cannot be controlled as easily. You're less likely to compromise your values or linger in situations that stunt your growth. That can make you uncomfortable company for those who prefer comfort over truth. Some relationships will fade because they were built on your willingness to sacrifice pieces of yourself to maintain peace. Sovereignty doesn't allow for that. The price also includes confronting yourself without distraction. There's no one to blame when you fail to act, no one to hide behind when you avoid the hard work. See yourself clearly, your flaws, your blind spots, your excuses. And in that clarity, you have two choices: change or accept yourself without running. Both are difficult, but both are steps toward the kind of freedom most people only talk about. The reward for paying that price is a life, unmistakably your own. This isn't to say that connection is irrelevant or undesirable. On the contrary, relationships can be richer, deeper, and more meaningful when you are already whole, when you no longer look to someone else to validate your existence. Every connection becomes a conscious choice rather than a necessity. Love is given freely. Friendship is shared without expectation. And every bond you form is strengthened because it complements your life rather than completes it. The independence you've cultivated doesn't isolate you. It frees you. You can accept help without feeling dependent, receive affection without needing it to define you, and allow people to come and go without destabilizing your foundation. Your sense of self is no longer fragile. It is anchored. You carry yourself with a quiet authority, one that doesn't demand recognition but naturally commands respect. And with that authority comes clarity. You no longer drift through life in search of approval or validation. You no longer measure success by how well your existence fits into someone else's expectations. Every choice, every risk, every act of creation is unmistakably yours. Mistakes no longer feel like failures, but like steps taken fully in your own agency. Victories are sweeter because they were earned, and setbacks are lighter because they are owned, not borrowed from someone else's judgment. Solitude, once feared, becomes your laboratory for growth, your canvas for creativity, and your sanctuary for reflection. You learn to savor ordinary moments because you are fully present in them, no longer filling your days to distract from discomfort or dependency. A walk at dusk, a quiet meal, the silence before sleep, all become vivid, alive, and fully yours. Ultimately, the greatest freedom is realizing that wholeness was never outside of you. The world may insist on narratives of incompleteness, dependence, or the need for constant companionship. But you have discovered the truth. You are already whole, already capable, already enough. That self, once obscured by distraction and compromise, now stands at the center of your life. Unshakable, complete, alive. To live in that truth is to live sovereign. To protect it is to honor yourself. And in a society that often confuses dependence for love and validation for worth, this realization is not just a personal victory, it is a radical act of freedom. Once you've met that version of yourself, nothing can take it from you. You no longer chase completeness because you already are complete. You no longer fear solitude because it has become a space of power, clarity, and creation. And you no longer need the world to tell you your value because it has always been written within you. Reason 4. Unique lifestyles for those who embrace unconventional lifestyles, whether they are minimalists, nomads, adventurers, or devoted to extraordinary artistic or humanitarian endeavors. Living differently is not just a preference. It's a calling. Stoicism, with its focus on living in harmony with nature and concentrating on what one can control, deeply shapes their life decisions. For them, Stoicism isn't merely a philosophy, it's a practical guide for daily living. It emphasizes self-discipline and mastery over one's responses to the outside world, which aligns perfectly with independent, self-reliant lifestyles. Consider, for example, the minimalist who finds joy in simplicity. Stoicism reinforces that true happiness comes not from possessions, but from living in accordance with one's virtues and values. Likewise, nomads resonate with Stoicism's lessons about adaptability and the fleeting nature of external circumstances. Moving through the world and creating home wherever they go requires resilience, flexibility, and contentment qualities Stoicism cultivates. These paths demand a high level of personal commitment and conviction, which can clash with the compromises. Relationships often require sharing life with another person typically involves adjustments that may interfere with unconventional goals. Stoics committed to personal integrity and authentic living may therefore view relationships as restrictive or misaligned with their philosophical ambitions. Autonomy and the pursuit of individual virtue further reinforce the choice to remain single. For those following less traveled paths, having the freedom to act in harmony with their values is essential. This doesn't mean they reject connection. Rather, finding a partner who genuinely shares and understands their principles can be extremely challenging. Reason 5. Career commitments. For many highly driven individuals, work isn't just a job, it's a calling that demands focus, energy, and time. Stoicism often guides these commitments, promoting discipline, purpose, and the pursuit of excellence. Living according to one's nature may mean dedicating oneself fully to a professional path. Whether that involves launching a startup, conducting groundbreaking research, or perfecting a craft, such dedication is central to their identity and life satisfaction. The intense focus on mastery aligns with Stoic ideals of virtue and excellence. As a result, the time and energy required for professional success can leave little room for romantic relationships, approaching life with rationality. Stoics may see remaining single as a strategic choice, avoiding emotional disruptions that could interfere with career goals. Stoicism's emphasis on self-sufficiency and contentment makes this choice even more appealing. Fulfillment comes from achieving one's professional objectives, not relying on relationships for happiness. This doesn't imply a rejection of human connection, but rather a preference for deriving satisfaction from accomplishments that advance their chosen path. By minimizing attachment to external desires, Stoics reinforce their commitment to career and personal development. Focusing on what they can control, their actions, responses, and dedication ensures their professional life remains on track. Relationships, with their inherent unpredictability, can sometimes conflict with this focus. Reason 6. Valuing financial autonomy. Many choose to stay single because they value the freedom to manage their finances independently, without the complications of shared economic responsibilities. Financial independence isn't just about money, it's about self-determination and maintaining personal power. Principles at the heart of Stoic philosophy. Stoicism teaches the importance of autonomy and living according to one's own rules, which extends to financial decisions. For Stoics, controlling their financial future is vital not for wealth's sake, but to preserve the freedom to make choices aligned with their values and life goals. Maintaining financial independence allows individuals to make decisions that best serve their personal growth without having to adjust or compromise for a partner's financial habits or goals. Beyond money, this independence reflects a broader sense of self-reliance, a principle highly valued in Stoicism. Stoic strives for inner tranquility and freedom, which is often easier to achieve when one isn't financially dependent on someone else. This autonomy is especially appealing to those who have seen the strain financial disagreements can place on relationships. Managing one's own finances reduces potential conflicts and allows for a life free from the stress and disruptions that money disputes can create. For those committed to a Stoic path, financial control also supports the pursuit of virtue, enables them to allocate resources in ways that align with their ethical and philosophical priorities. Whether investing in personal development, supporting meaningful causes, or living in a way that reflects their deepest convictions, financial independence also reflects a practical, rational approach to life's uncertainties. Stoics are taught to prepare for the unexpected, and managing one's finances is a key part of that preparedness. It creates a secure foundation, allowing them to pursue goals confidently without needing to negotiate or seek permission, thereby preserving freedom of action. Reason 7. Fulfillment in platonic relationships for Stoics. Friendships and family bonds can offer profound fulfillment. These relationships provide stability, reliability, deep understanding without the complexities of romantic entanglements. Platonic connections foster mutual respect, shared values, intellectual harmony, and alignment qualities Stoics deeply appreciate. In Stoicism, personal growth and the pursuit of virtue are central. Friends who support this journey are not just companions, they're fellow travelers, offering insights and challenges that promote self-awareness and improvement. These bonds create community and support without the dependencies often associated with romantic relationships. Moreover, platonic relationships help maintain the Stoic ideal of tranquility. They offer emotional support without the turmoil that romance can bring. The absence of romantic drama allows for peaceful companionship, which nurtures inner calm and rational focus. Freedom is another key benefit. Platonic bonds respect personal boundaries, allowing individuals to engage deeply when together, while providing space for reflection and growth when apart. This balance suits those prioritizing personal development and philosophical integrity, which can be harder to maintain in the emotional demands of a romantic partnership. Reason 8. Pursuit of unconventional goals for those guided by Stoic principles. Life is about forging one's own path, shaped by personal convictions and unique ambitions. This often leads to goals that differ from societal norms, whether in career, lifestyle, or self-development. Stoicism emphasizes living in harmony with one's nature and principles. Many Stoics dedicate themselves to unconventional pursuits that may conflict with traditional relationship expectations. This could be pursuing artistic endeavors with irregular schedules and periods of solitude, or committing to humanitarian work in distant locations. Such paths require commitment and focus that can be difficult to balance with the compromises of a conventional romantic relationship. Stoics prioritize self-sufficiency and the pursuit of personal virtue. For those driven by uncommon goals, personal fulfillment may not include a traditional partnership. Their ambitions demand flexibility and a high degree of self-focus, which can be challenging to maintain when compromise and shared decision-making are expected. Stoicism also emphasizes control over one's own destiny, which is often best exercised alone, allowing full immersion in one's pursuits without distraction. Additionally, Stoicism teaches indifference to external validation or societal pressures, empowering those with unconventional goals to pursue passions freely without needing approval from others. This philosophical perspective reinforces the idea that one does not need to follow societal expectations of marriage or relationships, to lead a meaningful, purposeful life. True fulfillment doesn't come from following society's expectations or the conventional path. Instead, it arises from pursuing goals that are closely aligned with one's deepest values and personal convictions. For Stoics, the pursuit of inner peace and tranquility often fits better with a life focused on individual endeavors rather than shared ones. The calm that comes from following one's passions without compromise or interruption is invaluable for those whose work lies off the beaten path. This sense of serenity is often easier to achieve in the clarity and solitude of singlehood, where the only expectations to meet are one's own. Reason 9. Learning from past experiences. Stoicism teaches us to view past experiences not as burdens, but as lessons that guide growth. Many people gain profound insights from previous relationships through heartbreak, betrayal, or simply realizing that their paths diverged from their partners. These experiences highlight what truly matters in life and emphasize the importance of staying true to oneself. For those who live by Stoic principles, every experience offers an opportunity for self-improvement. Past relationships reveal the importance of compatibility, not just superficially, but on a deeper philosophical level. True companionship requires shared values and a common outlook on life. This realization often leads Stoics to choose singlehood, not to avoid pain, but to live in alignment with their values of rationality, self-sufficiency, and emotional resilience. Past experiences also show how relationships can affect peace of mind and emotional stability. Stoicism emphasizes maintaining a tranquil mind, free from the disturbances that unhealthy or discordant relationships can bring. Choosing singlehood often reflects a deliberate effort to preserve this inner calm. This doesn't mean shutting oneself off from love entirely, but it encourages careful selection, ensuring any future relationships align with one's philosophy and life goals. Stoicism also promotes acceptance of what we cannot change and adapting to life with grace and fortitude. Learning from the past often means recognizing when it's wiser to adjust one's approach to relationships, or even to embrace singlehoods, a form of empowerment and proof of one's capacity for growth and self-mastery. Reason 10. Joy of solitude. Stoicism places great value on self-sufficiency and finding contentment within oneself. Solitude is more than a physical state. It's a mental and emotional space where one can reflect on life, engage deeply with thoughts, and cultivate inner virtues without the distractions of constant social interaction. For those who cherish solitude, this alone time is essential for maintaining mental clarity, emotional balance, and philosophical integrity. In solitude, Stoics have the freedom to explore their thoughts and emotions fully, understand their true nature, and align their actions with their values. This alignment is crucial, as Stoicism emphasizes living a life consistent with one's ethical beliefs. Time alone allows for careful reflection, helping plan future actions based on reason rather than impulse. The quiet of solitude also serves as a sanctuary from the noise of the world. In these moments, those who love solitude experience a profound sense of peace, often absent in the busyness of social life. They can engage in activities that bring personal joy: reading, writing, meditating, or hobbies requiring focus and calm. These pursuits are not just pastimes. They're key components of Stoic practice, cultivating patience, perseverance, and mind. Also allows for a deeper appreciation of nature and the world through quiet observation. A distinctly Stoic approach. Watching life without constant interaction fosters a greater understanding of one's place in the world, while reinforcing a sense of connection through thoughtful contemplation rather than active engagement. Asterisk, as we conclude today's exploration of the choices that shape a Stoic's path to solitude, remember, embracing singlehood is not merely about being alone. It's about being whole within oneself, guided by the virtues that define a truly fulfilled life. Thank you for joining us. If this discussion resonated with you, consider exploring more by watching the suggested videos on your screen. Thank you for being part of a community that celebrates the strength found in solitude and the wisdom behind mindful choices.